You've heard about the NSA spying on regular Americans. You've seen how surveillance cameras can help cops track down criminals. Maybe you even know someone who's gotten a ticket from one of those red light cameras. But do you know just how often you are being watched? It's Your Call shows you how Big Brother is watching, and we get started right now. Hello everyone, it's good to have you with us. I'm Lynn Doyle, and you know, I've spent my entire adult life in front of the television cameras. I know that I have eyes and ears on me all the time, from the moment I walk into the studio to the time I walk out again. Here, there is no such thing as privacy. But how about outside these walls? Should I live my life as though the cameras are always on? Well, apparently the answer is yes. There are cameras everywhere these days, in places you may not even be aware of, like in shopping centers or grocery stores. Surveillance equipment is on our street corners, it's on our mass transit, it's at work, and it's at school, it's even at intersections. And of course, everyone seems to have a cell phone with a camera on it, and social media sites and the internet are filled with videos taken by people capturing events around them. So given all that, should we ever have an expectation of privacy? Or has that gone the way of the landline? Well, this hour on It's Your Call, we hope to make you aware of who's watching you, where they're doing it, and what they can do with what they see. You can feel free to join in anytime that you have a question by emailing me directly at lynn@lynndoyle.net. Let me ask that question first this hour to our panel, which includes Ed Trzanski, who, as you know, is the Sir John Templeton Fellow and co-chair of the Center for the Study of Terrorism at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. He is also a national security, intelligence, and political analyst. Mary Catherine Roper is the senior staff attorney with the ACLU of Pennsylvania. I'm sure they're watching this very closely. Michael Chitwood has been the superintendent of police of the Upper Darby Township Police Department in Pennsylvania since 2005, an old friend of the show. And rounding out the panel is Scott Vernick, a privacy and data security attorney and a partner at Fox Rothschild in Philadelphia. Thank you, everyone, for being with us.
Thank you.
So anybody here have an expectation of privacy today, or have we just totally eliminated that? I'm going to turn to Ed first, because he's been with us for years and years, and we've talked about surveillance and security on a national level. But how about in our daily lives? Do people realize how often they're on camera, on tape?
Len, I don't know that they realize that, or that they have in mind how much information they hand over by themselves, especially young people who are more facile with technology. And really, this is so much driven by technology. Youngsters wind up giving up so much personal information through Facebook and other forms of social media, and don't recognize how that information winds up being used.
How could it be used, Scott? By giving out so much personal information, either through social media sites, on the internet, or just by our daily routine, how could it be used against us?
Well, I think if you take the example of Facebook, so one of the things that Facebook likes to do is it likes to mine the data of Facebook users. And the information that people put out on Facebook helps advertisers direct advertisement to people using the internet. So that's one way, and that's a big draw for Facebook and its advertisers.
Now that doesn't sound like it's invasive or intrusive. It just sounds like it could be a business practice. Is there a way that it could be used negatively against people who are giving out information?
Sure. Well, this is the big thing. I mean, one of the ways in which it's used negatively, of course, is if potential employers look at your Facebook postings and see what you're up to. Now, a lot of states have taken affirmative action against that and make it illegal for interviewers or for potential employers to ask applicants for their Facebook password. But that doesn't mean that it's that way in all states. And so, of course, people are being advised to be cautious about what they're putting on Facebook so that potential employers don't use it against them. But I think that the bigger concern really is what, for example, the government might be doing with what's on Facebook.
Yeah, it certainly is a concern, I'm sure, to our viewers. If you want to join in here and you have a question or a comment that you want to make, go ahead and email me now. You heard Scott say, he used the term data mining. It's actually come under some criticism for law enforcement officials, because people are saying, well, wait a minute, the police officers and law enforcement are using this, but not necessarily always to solve crimes. Is it a give and take that we have to accept in 2013?
I think from my perspective, looking at Facebook is an investigative tool. We get a suspect who committed a series of robberies. More often than not, that individual is up there on Facebook talking about, I did this, here's my gun, here's the money, here's what I took. that's a home run for us. But I think, like everything else, there has to be policies and procedures in place and common sense value to what you're doing or the intelligence you're trying to gather. But Facebook is a great resource for law enforcement to investigate.
Another resource for law enforcement to use is the photo imaging of license plates, and that too has created some controversy.
It has created a lot of controversy, and again, I think it's like everything else, you have to have policies and procedures. It's like GPS, you have to have a warrant now. So, I mean, it depends on how you're using it and the appropriate protocols in place to make sure that you're using it appropriately.
Now, the ACLU has been protecting personal rights for as long as I can remember. I would imagine that this topic is one that has moved to the top of the list for monitoring for you.
Absolutely. So just as Superintendent Chitwick says, the issue for us isn't that law enforcement has a specific investigative need and goes after a specific piece of information. Our concern is sort of the wholesale collection of information that's going on more at the federal level, but at every level, and how that can be misused. In other words, that information isn't only available when there's a crime to investigate. That information is available whenever anyone wants to, say, as the Pennsylvania Office of Homeland Security did, make a list of people who are protesting about fracking.
Okay, both of you have talked about what the federal government can do with the information that is made available to them. Give me an example of what we as regular citizens should be concerned about when it comes to the government.
So there's a couple of things. Let's talk about the recent disclosures following the Snowden affair, all right? So one of the things that came out of that is the fact that the federal government has the ability to apply for a secret order to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court to gather phone records. And in this particular instance, we're talking about an order that was issued to Verizon to turn over all phone records of all Americans, whether the calls were made within the United States or whether the calls were made from the United States to foreign countries. Now, the government doesn't have a right to listen to the content of those phone calls, but it does have a right to collect all of the metadata. And the metadata is very important because it talks about the origin of a call, where the call was going to, how long the call was placed, and also the location of the call.
Okay.
So that's an important thing that the government, as we know now, is collecting.
And the problem with that is that there are no limits on how long the government keeps that information or what it does with that information, at least no external limits, right? The government will tell you, we've got some policies in place, but those aren't subject to outside scrutiny or checking.
So I have to turn to Ed, though, who I've been working with, especially since 2001, when the World Trade Center and the attack in Washington occurred. And you've always said that whatever tools necessary need to be implemented to protect Americans and our security.
Well, let's keep a couple things in mind. First of all, the problem prior to 9/11 was we didn't connect the dots. So now people said connect dots. And we put in place certain procedures building upon the FISA court, which was established in 1978, well before 9/11.
Okay.
There's three ways we can spot a terror attack. We can interrogate people, we can infiltrate the organization, or we can intercept calls. We're not interrogating people the way we used to. We're just not allowed, and in many cases, we kill them with drones. We don't have them to interrogate. It's hard to penetrate the network. So now we say intercept the call. That means find the needle in the haystack. The problem is I have to go through the haystack.
I was just going to say, so if the ability by the government to monitor my calls exist, but I'm not a threat or a perceived threat to national security, the fact that they can do it upsets me.
No, think of it this way. Think of it this way. There are cameras in public places. You are automatically photographed just for passing through the place. Doesn't mean we stop you, doesn't mean we want to hear what you're talking about, unless other pieces of information come along that suggest you're doing something you shouldn't, in which case you go to a judge, you go to the FISA court to get the warrant. Then you can listen in.
Okay.
And that is an important point because there's a lot of misinformation out there about what Snowden revealed and what he did not reveal and what the foreign intelligence surveillance activities are. And what should be clear is that with respect to the Verizon order, no one is listening in on anybody's phone call. What the government is doing is it's collecting the metadata of those phone calls. And what that gives them is the ability, as Ed said, to connect the dots. That's the ability that
You
we didn't have.
reverse engineer. You go back once you've got pieces of information that suggest now we ought to be listening, then you go to the judge to get the warrant.
All right, on that note, we're going to take a quick break, but we want to give you an opportunity now that you've heard a bit from our experts to join in. Do you think that privacy has gone by the wayside, or should you be able to expect privacy in certain places? Do you know that the government is watching you? Do you think that the government is watching you, and should it be watching you? If you want to tell us what you think about that and whether or not you support surveillance as a means of protecting us, you can email me directly during the break. I'm at lynn@lynndoyle.net. And you know what? Guess what? You can find us on Facebook. We're also on Twitter. We're going to check in with your comments in just a moment. Stay with us. In this day and age of Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and the like, it seems like everyone tells everyone else about what they're doing, no matter how mundane. So is it okay then for that lack of privacy to extend to other areas, like allowing police to use license plate imaging to look for crooks or red light cameras to catch irresponsible drivers? That's our topic this hour here on It's Your Call. Welcome back, everyone. Glad to have you with us. We're calling it Big Brother is Watching. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, they used that expression and it was a very negative thing, like the government or the Russians or the bad guys were looking in. Now it seems like it's pretty much part of our lives. You can't walk through an intersection that you're not on a surveillance camera someplace, you're not in a grocery store or a bar or a school or mass transit, anywhere that you're not being recorded. Maybe you don't know it, but after this show, you should know it, and you should know what they can do with that information. You know, there are situations, Superintendent, where having this surveillance society in place really does help law enforcement. Give me an example of some places where it might be effective.
Well, I'll give you an example of how that technology has increased. We go to a crime scene, burglary, a robbery, a murder. First thing we do is, who's got video? Mm-hmm. And more often than not, the video gives us an idea of where they are. So a video is in a private home, in a business, inside a bank, inside a grocery store, you name it. You can put video surveillance anywhere that you feel appropriate.
And sometimes it's not even right where the crime occurred. It might be across the street at an ATM or a bank or a school or elsewhere, where they can capture things just almost incidentally without even realizing that they were watching a crime.
After the initial investigation, we take a block, square. We square it off a block and we look for all the video that we can find in that particular area, and then we view it to see if we saw anything.
That's what we just saw happen in the city of Philadelphia, where there had been a terrible building collapse. And as the investigators were looking through, trying to figure out how this happened, this video emerged from a bus. Who would think, as it was driving down, that on the right it would be capturing a building collapse as it occurred? So, Mary Catherine, when there's this positiveness that comes out of this surveillance society, why not support it? Why not actually encourage more use of it?
Well, I don't think there's any chance we're turning back the clock and taking away the cameras. What we need is to put rules on how they use them. So let me give you an example. Superintendent Chitwick also has data from license plate readers. And when he uses that to find a stolen car, that's great. But there's no rule that says he can't use that to figure out who visits the local psychiatrist, who visits the local drug rehabilitation center. The problem is that we don't have limits, external limits. We're relying on the good faith of our law enforcement, and sometimes that doesn't pay off.
I disagree, obviously, from a law enforcement perspective. I mean, common sense dictates the rule of the day. I mean, sure, with the cameras and surveillance, you can gather a lot of intelligence, but it's up to the law enforcement community, and I'll agree with Mary Catherine that there needs to be laws, procedures, protocols in place that says you can and when you can't. I mean, it's the bottom line. I mean, I think that would resolve a lot of the issues that the legal community and the law enforcement community are battling with, that they have protocols.
We're looking at video that is captured by either surveillance or just individuals who happen to have a cell phone. I don't know how you're able to control that release or what's done with it, regardless of, Scott, what kinds of laws might be in place or requirements or recommendations? I mean, these are average people with a cell phone
Sure.
capturing life around them.
Right, and I think that, you know, this whole debate, you have to sort of keep one thing in mind. You have to make a distinction between what private citizens are doing, and then you have to make a distinction between what the government is doing, because that's really where the legal divide is. What most people get upset about is what authority and what right does the government have to intrude on our private lives, and where do we have a reasonable expectation of privacy, and where don't we have a reasonable expectation of privacy. And the problem is that with technology, we're able to sort of blur those lines, and we're able to invade people's privacy with a greater degree of effectiveness than ever before. So to Mary Catherine's point, you know, we collect all this data, but who's in charge of saying how long and when do we dispose of it and when is it stale? You know, that's the issue with the license plate readers, because we don't ever get rid of anything anymore. I'll give you another example. Most people don't know that in their cars they have a black box. It sits right under the center console. That black box records information at the point of a car accident. It's tremendously useful. But do I have a right to get your black box if, you know, you're in a car accident? Or do the police have a right to get it? And most people don't even know it's there. 96% of cars today have black boxes.
I was just going to say, I bet there are people at home, myself included, going, gee, I didn't know that. I mean, that might help if you're looking for evidence that someone did you wrong, but what if you were at fault?
What Scott, we just had a serious accident yesterday, and our protocol was get a warrant to get the black box out. That was our protocol. So, I mean, if there are mechanisms in place to protect the rights of the owner of the car or whoever else, then I think that's
and this is a hotly debated issue because, as you know, in New Jersey, there's now legislation that says that if you're in a car accident, the police should be able to take your cell phone without a warrant. And that's a very hotly debated topic right now about whether or not, you know, first of all, whether or not that would even be constitutional, but whether or not the legislation will pass in the first instance.
And the purpose for that is to try to determine, as an investigator, whether
somebody was
the
on a cell
driver
phone.
was distracted.
Right, exactly.
So let me ask our viewers if they agree with that. Would you agree that police should have the right to take your cell phone after an accident to either prove that you were distracted or to disprove, like actually to take away any thought that maybe you were talking on the phone or texting?
Well, let's talk about
it work both ways? Is it a double-edged sword?
Let's talk about the next question, which is if the police have your cell phone and they want to look to see what you were doing just before the accident, that's not how your phone works, right? If they have access to your phone, they have access to everything in your phone. And what is to keep them from looking to see who else you've been calling, from downloading that data and going through it later? The problem with the collection of information, as Scott says, is there's no expiration date. The NSA, the government, can check and see who I called 3 years ago.
But can I backtrack and say the same thing my mother used to say when I was a kid? If you don't have anything to hide, what's the problem?
You know what? It is no one's business where I worship, whom I speak to. If I am not breaking the law, why are you collecting that kind of information on me and everybody else?
Yeah, see, Lynn, I don't think that's the right analysis. I don't think it's fair to say if you're not doing anything wrong, what are you afraid of? Because that's not the way our constitutions are set up, whether they're federal constitutions or whether they're state constitutions. The fact of the matter is that we are a nation of laws that says that we are to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures in our home and in our private property. It's not a question about whether we're doing something wrong. It's the question of unwarranted government intrusion.
I agree with that point, and let's go from the hypothetical to an illustration. We have a controversy with the IRS having targeted individuals based on their political belief. They went after Tea Party types. This is an ongoing controversy. It's very clear that that information should not have been disclosed. It was disclosed. The information was abused. And we're waiting to see how that abuse is going to be treated. And now the same IRS is going to be collecting information about our health status under the Affordable Care Act. What precautions are built in to make sure that your private health information isn't used in a political way or in some other way that's nefarious in terms of intent.
I think we're going to have to do an entire show on that. Right now, I do have to take a break, but before we go, we do want to thank Mary Catherine for being with us. If there was a piece of advice that you would give for living in the digital age, what would it be? How can we protect ourselves?
We need to insist that our government put limits on and limits that we can see. President Obama has said that he welcomes the debate about government surveillance. Let's have that debate, but we need to know what we're talking about. We need information.
All right, and we need to be aware of our surroundings at all times. Thank you very much for being with us. We're going to return with the rest of our panel right after this, though. If you have questions or comments, be sure to email me during the break. I'm at lynn@lynndoyle.net. Thanks. Welcome back again, everyone. I'm Lynn Doyle. This is It's Your Call, and we are talking about living in a surveillance society. You know, everywhere you look, there are cameras. And I was making a joke at the beginning of the hour by saying that, you know, I've lived my whole life in front of the camera with you. But nowadays, even what you watch on TV can be tracked. And what you do on a daily basis can be tracked by your GPS, by the use of your phone, by your employee swipe card. Are you aware of this, and does it concern you? If there are concerns about being followed, tracked, surveilled, whatever word you want to use, is there really anything in this day and age that we can do about it?
Well, I think you have to be careful about what personal details you voluntarily offer up. I said this earlier, and I'm taken aback at youngsters, how much they will put about their private lives into cyberspace and presume that it'll go away. One of the things that we should be telling our kids is, once you've put it out there, it stays and it can be used. So there has to be some prudence about what you volunteer up on your own.
You know, it's interesting though, it's not just kids. I mean, some of the posts that I see on Facebook, using that as an example, surprise me what people say about their employers or their job or their workplace or people that they work with. And I think eventually that could come back to bite them.
Well, there's no doubt that it can, and there's no doubt that there's been lawsuits alleging libel and defamation for things that appear on Facebook. But to your earlier point, what I think is that the viewing public has to be much more cautious, as Ed says, about what they put on the internet, and they have to exercise and take control of that by using the privacy protections that Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and others put on there. I mean, if you don't want certain people to view it, or you only want it to be on there for a certain period of time, those tools do exist. Now, I'm not saying that the social media companies necessarily make it easy for you. They're not in the business of making it easy for you. But those privacy controls, those safeguards do exist, and people can implement them when they're using social media.
And of course, we do have to return to the fact that it can be very helpful, particularly to law enforcement, if people are recording what's going on around them, if they're observing. They make the best witnesses when you see it on videotape.
Videotape is better than anybody can testify to. I mean, it's documented, and it's something that we look for all the time.
We just saw an occasion where Eagles rookie was caught on camera. We have seen where quotes from other people, things that they might be saying where they think no one is watching them. It's not just a legal or societal, but it's a personal responsibility that everyone's going to have to assume, that you have to take care of your own behavior. I do want to thank you so much for the advice that you have given us today and made us aware of. We appreciate you guys being here. Always wonderful to see you. And we appreciate you watching us as well. If you have questions or comments for our panel, you can email them to me and I'll make sure that I forward them along. I'm at lynn@lynndoyle.net. Be sure to find us on Facebook and Twitter as well. We'll see you the next time.